The lemon zest was still on her fingers. Powdered sugar clung to her apron. And the cake 3 tiers hand-piped glazed with care stood untouched on the counter. Then my phone vibrated. Change of plans. Riverside Bistro. Adults only. Sorry. I read it twice. The text was from my father. 18 relatives. Gone just like that. They hadn't forgotten. They'd excluded us intentionally. Mia looked up smiling. Should we box the tarts now or wait till the car cools off? She had no idea. My stomach twisted. I glanced at her lemon meringue's edges curled like golden suns lined in neat rows. 3 days. She had baked for 3 days. For her grandmother, for family, for love. And none of them were coming. I took a breath. The air smelled like butter and citrus and something else burnt expectations. I walked to the window. Across the street, someone watered petunias, humming softly. Normal. Unaware. While inside, my world was splintering again. History repeats itself in the cruelest ways. They did this to me when I was 10. My own birthday party rescheduled for a charity gala. My place at the table always seemed optional. But I had promised it would be different for Mia. I turned to her. She was still humming, arranging the pecan pies like a display in a French cafe. Her sleeves were rolled up. A smudge of flour on her cheek. A heart so open it ached. And suddenly, I couldn't lie to her. They changed the venue, I said softly. She blinked. What? But the house adults only, I added the words dry as chalk. She stood still. Then quietly she pulled off her apron. One tie fell to the floor like a ribbon cut short. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She simply walked out of the kitchen barefoot, the floor creaking beneath her. I stood in that silence for a long time. There are betrayals that scream. And some that whisper through locked group chats and curated brunch tables. That day my daughter was erased. Not by accident, but by choice. And I had a choice too. Would I keep swallowing their silence, or finally rewrite the script this time for her? Would you fight back or walk away? Where are you listening from? Has your child ever been treated this way? Share your story in the comments. Subscribe for more true stories of quiet justice and healing after betrayal. By Monday morning, the house smelled like lavender dish soap and cooling sugar crust. The kitchen sink held yesterday's sorrow in the form of mixing bowls and sticky spoons. I hadn't touched a single dish. Mia didn't come down for breakfast. I left a note by the toaster. Left early. Eggs in the fridge. I love you, Mom, and drove toward Lincoln High, the campus where I worked and rebuilt myself. Portland had been a second chance I never knew I'd need. After I left Seattle, after the divorce, after the breakdown, I came here with one suitcase, a broken career, and a little girl who still called me Mama in her sleep. That was 7 years ago. Now the house we rented then is ours. A modest craftsman on a quiet street where wind chimes play like whispers. I drink French roast on the porch every Sunday. Mia bakes. We have rules about honesty and looking people in the eyes when we're scared. And until yesterday, I thought we were winning. I parked beside the school counseling office, walked past the brick planter Mia and I helped repaint last spring. The mural was still chipped in the corner. No one fixed it. But it was still ours. In my office, I sat beneath the string lights and framed student photos. Smiling seniors in caps and gowns, a sticky note from one of the shyest girls I ever worked with. You made me believe I'm not invisible. I stared at it. Because for a long time, I had felt invisible too. To my mother. To the family that always had space for Margaret's image but never for her daughter's actual voice. Margaret Hayes. Socialite. Garden club president. Holiday party hostess. Mother of the girl who was too emotional, too serious, and too much. She was raised to impress. I was raised to behave. Sometimes I wondered if she loved the version of me she presented to others more than the real person behind it. The real me with opinions and anger and boundaries was always a bit inconvenient. But Mia cracked her open. When Mia was little, Margaret took to her instantly. Sent tea sets from her travels. Bought matching aprons for their baking days. Called her my perfect girl. And maybe that's why this betrayal stung even more. Because unlike me, Mia had done everything right. She was kind, generous, meticulous. She showed up with her whole heart. And they didn't even open the door. I should have known. The signs were all there. I just didn't want to see them. 3 days before the party, I noticed the group chat had gone quiet. The one titled Margaret's 75th Peens, where cousins posted cake memes and drink suggestions. Suddenly nothing. Not a single ping. I sent a quick message, "Hey, final head count, want to make sure Mia bakes enough." No response. Hours passed. Then came the excuse. "Still confirming RSVPs, Aunt Carol's allergic to nuts, will get back to you soon." But I wasn't blind. 2 days later, my niece posted a boomerang of cocktails clinking under candlelight with the caption, "Can't wait for this weekend. You get number adults night," same bistro where they eventually gathered. Same faces, same smiles. Mia saw it too. She didn't say a word, but I saw the flicker in her eyes. That moment when a child starts putting the puzzle pieces together and realizes they don't belong. It was like watching my own past replay in her soft, trusting face. Back in Tacoma, I was always the one doing the most and getting the least. Baking for bake sales I wasn't thanked for. Helping decorate for parties I wasn't invited to fully enjoy. My mother never outright said I didn't belong. She simply curated gatherings that made it clear. The polished version of the Hayes family didn't have room for messy truths or inconvenient daughters. Mia thought things were different. She adored her grandmother. Spoke about their shared love of vanilla bean and antique tea tins. She once saved up for weeks to buy Margaret a copper whisk engraved with "Love Mia." It still sat on Margaret's counter as far as I knew, unused but visible like a badge. I kept trying to believe it meant something. That this time they saw us. That my daughter wouldn't have to earn love with labor the way I did. But now I knew. Love in our family had always been performance-based. Conditional. Pretty. Quiet. Convenient. And Mia, beautiful soul that she was, had baked herself into heartbreak. That evening we didn't talk much. I reheated soup neither of us finished. The dining table was still dressed for a party, blue linen runner, silver-trimmed plates, mason jars wrapped in ribbon. The cake stood quietly in the corner. Uncut, unseen. Mia picked at her bread, her face calm. Too calm. That kind of stillness that only comes when a heart is learning how to protect itself. I wanted to fix it. To explain, to rage, to take the pain away. But all I could do was sit with her in that silence and let her know she wasn't alone. After dinner, she wiped down the counter without being asked. Then paused, cloth in hand. "Did Grandma say anything else?" she asked. I shook my head. "Number. Just that text." She nodded. "Okay." Then she went upstairs. No slamming doors, no tears. Just footsteps retreating into a world where things made more sense. I stood in the kitchen long after the light had gone gray. Watched the wind tug gently at the sheer curtains. The house smelled like cinnamon and lemon and something faintly sad. My eyes landed on the whisk. The one Mia had practiced piping with for weeks. The one she cleaned and dried with care after every trial run. Lying on the counter now like a question no one wanted to answer. I thought of all the times I had tried to make it right with my parents. All the bending, shrinking, performing. And what did it ever earn me? An invitation only when I kept quiet. A seat only if I didn't take up too much space. But Mia deserved more than I ever had. And I was done handing her over to a legacy that made her feel small. That night I stood by her door. Listened to her slow, tired breathing. She was asleep, I hoped. I whispered through the wood. "We'll make this right. On our own terms." Then I went downstairs, took the cake out of the fridge and stared at it. 3 tiers. Sugar flowers. A crown of candied lemon peel. It wasn't a waste, it just needed a new table. I opened my laptop. Searched for Portland community events. Clicked the tab that read Neighborhood Resource Center, Family Outreach. Then I typed, "We have cake. A lot of it. Would you like some?" And I hit send. The next morning the group chat was gone. Not muted. Not archived. Gone. I checked again. Scrolled past PTA messages and baking club threads, nothing. No Margaret 75th. No emojis, no silence, just erased. I wasn't removed. The entire thread had been deleted. As if none of it ever happened. As if we had never happened. I stared at my phone, numb fingers curling tighter. Then I opened Instagram. Typed my sister's name. Her story glowed in that mocking rainbow circle. I tapped. There they were, laughing around a long table at Riverside Bistro. Gold-rimmed glasses. Tiled walls. A candle flickered beside a bottle of Syrah someone had once told me I wasn't refined enough to appreciate. In the center was Margaret, a soft pink blouse. Matching earrings. She was smiling in that way she's saved for photographers and pastors. One hand held a menu, the other held a toast. To chosen family, the caption read, "Chosen." I had to sit down. The couch felt too soft beneath me, like it was folding in. A second video autoplayed, a plate of foie gras. Laughter. Harold clinking glasses with my brother-in-law. Then a voice off camera. Someone young, maybe my cousin's daughter. "Honestly, it's nice without the kids this time." A chorus of agreement. A blur of raised glasses. And then silence. I closed the app. This wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't scheduling chaos. It wasn't miscommunication. It was deliberate. Polished. Cruel in its elegance. They had decided what the night would look like. And we didn't fit the aesthetic. At lunch, I sat with Lisa under the back stairwell at Lincoln High. The only quiet corner where we could eat without interruptions. I told her everything. Well, almost everything. I left out the part where my hands shook as I threw out Mia's uneaten lemon squares. Left out the part where I almost texted Margaret, "You erased my daughter." Lisa listened, nodding slowly, chewing her sandwich with that jaw-clenched stillness she used when she was furious on my behalf. After a long pause, she said, "Do you want to send them pictures of the cake?" I blinked. "What?" She shrugged. "Sometimes you hold up the truth, just let them see it." I didn't answer. I wasn't sure if I wanted them to see, or if I just wanted to disappear from their sight entirely. That evening, I opened the family photo album. The one Margaret had mailed me 5 Christmases ago, pre-wrapped pristine. Each page laminated. Each smile rehearsed. There were pictures of baby Mia in Margaret's lap. Thanksgiving dinners from back when we were still invited. Me in a cranberry sweater, holding mashed potatoes cropped just close enough to hide the wine stain on my jeans. I stared at the page. Then turned it slowly. On the next spread there was a collage from Margaret's 70th birthday. Riverside Bistro. Same tiled wall. Same glass chandeliers. And there we were. Mia in a green velvet dress, me beside her blinking mid-laugh. The only candid in the whole set. Back then, they'd let us in. Barely, with conditions. With rules about how long to stay, when not to speak too much. That was the last time Mia had been included. I shut the album and placed it under the cabinet behind the water bills and expired coupons. That night, while folding laundry, I overheard Mia in her room. She was on a call. I paused in the hallway. "Yeah," she said, voice quiet. "I guess we just didn't make the list." A beat of silence. "No, it's fine. I mean, Grandma's old. Maybe she just forgot." I bit my lip. My child, my brilliant, beautiful girl, was finding ways to justify the unjustifiable. Creating logic to soften rejection. Like I once did, I couldn't let her do that, not like I had, not for decades. The next morning I made French toast. Extra cinnamon, just the way she liked. She sat down slowly, still in her hoodie, cheeks pink from sleep. I poured coffee into her favorite mug, the one that read "Don't mess with a baker" in bold pink font. She didn't speak for a while. Then finally, "Why didn't they want me there?" I looked at her. Really looked. She wasn't asking for logic. She was asking if it was her fault, and she needed to hear the truth. They made a choice, I said. A bad one. And it had nothing to do with you. She nodded. But the hurt didn't leave her eyes. Some wounds don't heal on the first truth. Later that day I sat in the car after work, keys still in the ignition. The engine hummed softly like a lullaby, trying to calm something uncalmable inside me. I stared at the dashboard clock. 4:52 p.m. Almost time to pick up groceries, but I couldn't move. Couldn't shift out of park. Because something inside me had shifted first. For years I tried to believe that if I showed up enough, if I gave enough, loved enough, they'd come around. That they'd see me. That they'd see her. But I was done with waiting. Done with fitting into tables I was never meant to sit at. Mia's cake was still in the fridge. We hadn't cut a single slice. Its frosting was starting to sweat under the plastic dome, but the sugar flowers held firm. So had she. That night after dinner I sat at the kitchen island and searched again. Not for restaurants. Not for apology cards I'd never send. I searched for something bigger. Portland shelter meals. Community centers. Youth programs. Family nights. I clicked one that read, Tuesday community table, all welcome. There was a note seeking baked goods and warm hands. We serve about 40. 40. We had more than enough. I closed my laptop, feeling something I hadn't felt in days. Purpose. The next morning I texted Lisa. Want to help me set a better table? She replied in seconds. You bring the pie. I'll bring the candles. Mia was still quiet that day. But when I mentioned the community table, her eyes flickered. I didn't ask her to say yes. Didn't push, just let her know the cake wasn't wasted. It just hadn't found the right people yet. That night she stood at the counter tracing her finger along the icing. Then she said, should we make name cards? I nodded. And we began again. I waited until Thursday to call her. Part of me hoped she'd call first, say she regretted it. Say Mia had been a mistake, a miscommunication. But she didn't. Of course she didn't. So I dialed. The line rang 4 times before her voice came through, calm and clipped. Karen. Just my name. No warmth. No hello. I swallowed. Hi, Mom. A pause. Then, is something wrong? I nearly laughed. The question felt surgical. Precise. A blade pretending to be concern. I wanted to talk about Sunday, I said. Another pause. I could hear her setting down a mug, the sound of ceramic on wood. I pictured her at the kitchen table in Seattle, hydrangeas on the windowsill, pearls still on from breakfast with Harold. What about it? You changed the location. You didn't tell us. Mia baked for 3 days. Silence. Then, oh, Karen. It wasn't personal. That sentence. God, that sentence. I'd heard it all my life. When they forgot to pick me up from camp. When my birthday was moved because of Harold's work dinner. When Margaret wore white to my wedding and insisted it was just cream. It wasn't personal. I gripped the phone tighter. She was heartbroken, I said. She still is. I'm sorry, she feels that way, she said gently. Not I'm sorry. Not I shouldn't have done that. Just regret that someone dared to feel something about her actions. She continued. We wanted an intimate setting this year, just adults. It wasn't about excluding anyone. But it was. Of course it was. Because they could have invited Mia. She's 18. Graduating high school, not a toddler, not a disruption. You called it a family celebration, I said, but you erased your family. I waited. No apology came. Only this, Karen, if we start taking everything so personally, how will we ever move forward? And there it was. The Hayes family motto. Don't react, don't feel, don't ruin the photo. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan spinning shadows on the plaster. And suddenly I was 10 again. Wearing a new blue dress. Hair curled in sponge rollers overnight. Waiting by the stairs for my parents to take me to Aunt Lily's Christmas Eve dinner. They left without me. Said later they thought I was riding with Uncle Jeff. I ate dinner alone that night. Cold green beans. No explanation. Back then I thought it was my fault. Too quiet, too slow. Too forgettable. But now I saw it clearly. It was never forgetfulness. It was convenience. And I refused to let Mia become convenient. Friday morning, I stood in front of the mirror brushing my hair, watching strands fall onto the sink. Stress had always shown itself this way. Hairline fraying. Teeth grinding. Dreams I couldn't remember but woke up from shaking. Mia passed by the doorway holding a tray of brownies. Still baking, still giving, even when no one asked for it. I called out, "Hey, can I help?" She smiled faintly. "I'm okay, I just like having something to do." Her voice was too light, the kind of light you wear like armor. I nodded. But inside my chest ached. Because I had been her. At 16, I was president of student council, maid honor roll. Took care of Harold's schedule when Margaret had migraines, played hostess when they had dinner guests. All for a scrap of approval. A nod, a seat. And I'd convinced myself it was enough. That being useful meant being loved. Now I watched my daughter cut brownies into perfect squares for people who'd never taste them. And I saw the pattern clear as glass. Margaret hadn't just excluded us from a party. She taught us our place in the family pecking order. Pretty helpful, never loud. There for the photo, but never the framing. I sat at the dining table and opened the notebook I kept for journaling. I hadn't written in months. On the first page I scrawled, "This stops with me." Then I drew a line down the center. One side said what I was taught, the other said what I want Mia to know. I filled it slowly. Keep quiet, use your voice. Don't take up space, you belong anywhere you stand. Say thank you even when it hurts. Walk away when it hurts. Make it look easy. It's okay to show struggle. The list grew. So did my certainty. I didn't need revenge. I needed truth. I needed Mia to know that being left out by people who never truly saw you was not a reflection of your worth. It was theirs, their lack, their legacy. And we weren't going to carry it any further. That night we lit candles for the community dinner. Lisa brought cloth napkins. Mia arranged lemon slices beside the pie crusts. And I sat watching her with a quiet pride I hadn't felt in years. She wasn't invisible, she was radiant. And I was finally ready to protect her in the way no one ever protected me. On Sunday, Margaret called again. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. But I answered. Her voice was light, too light. "Hi, sweetheart. I heard from Carol that you did something quite lovely with the cake. Not I'm sorry for what happened. Not even how's Mia. Just that a detached curiosity like I was a distant niece who made a nice Pinterest post. I let the silence hang." She continued, "Giving it to those families. It's very charitable of you. Very inspiring. Inspiring." I looked at the phone like it had just burned me. She had managed to turn a betrayal into a compliment. To fold our pain into something socially palatable. Charitable. I cleared my throat. "Mom, I need to be clear about something." She went quiet. I took a breath. Measured. Calm. Firm. We're not decorations. Mia's not a garnish on your life. You don't get to cut her out and call it strategy. And you don't get to soften what happened by pretending it was thoughtful. She was silent. I pressed on voice lower. We're done showing up where we're not respected. Done performing. Done making it easy for everyone else to look good while we sit quietly in the background. Her response was a soft sigh. "Karen, you've always been so intense." I almost laughed. There it was again, minimizing, redirecting, brushing past the bruise. Pretending the bruise was personality. But I didn't back down. Not this time. "You don't have to understand," I said, "but you do have to accept the boundaries we're drawing. From now on, if you want us in the room, Mia especially, it'll require more than an invitation. It'll require respect." She didn't reply. But I heard it. The subtle shift. The first crack in the glass. And for once I didn't fill the silence. I let her sit in it. The weight of it was hers to carry now. That night, Mia and I sat under a string of fairy lights in the backyard. She was barefoot in the grass laughing softly at a video from the dinner. A toddler had smeared chocolate on his forehead and declared, "I'm dessert." We both laughed. And for the first time in days, the laughter felt whole. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Do you think they'll ever get it? I didn't pretend. Maybe, but even if they don't, we already do." Mia stopped baking. Not in a dramatic way. Not with slammed cupboards or declarations of being done. It was more like a dimmer switch. The mixing bowls sat untouched on the counter for a week. Her aprons still hung on the back of the pantry door, neatly folded, never used. The sourdough starter she'd been nurturing for months began to collapse. She said she was tired. Too much homework, senior year stress. But I knew. I knew the look in her eyes when she scrolled past family photos online. The way she flinched, not visibly but internally, every time someone said the word party. One evening I heard her rummaging in the kitchen. It was late. The house had gone quiet. I stayed upstairs listening. She wasn't cooking, just standing. Maybe looking at the cake dome again. Maybe staring into the refrigerator light like I used to when I didn't know what to do with my pain. The next morning, I found one pecan pie on the counter. Wrapped, perfect, untouched. No note. No explanation. I didn't ask. That's the thing about generational pain. Sometimes it doesn't scream. Sometimes it just stops showing up. At work, I walked past the break room and heard two colleagues talking. About their mothers. Birthday cards. Grandbabies. I smiled. Nodded. Pretended I wasn't shrinking. I couldn't tell them that my mother barely asked about my life anymore. That she still hadn't called Mia directly. That the Hayes family had moved on and we were just omitted. I sat alone at lunch that day. Texted Lisa, but she didn't reply right away. So I opened my planner. Looked at the weekend. Blank. It wasn't the silence that hurt. It was what it implied. That we were forgettable. Optional. And yet, I couldn't go back to pretending. Not now. Not after telling Mia the truth. I just didn't know if the truth was enough to keep her from closing up completely. By Saturday, I started second-guessing everything. Maybe I had been too harsh. Too quick to cut the cord. Too loud in a family built on silence. I replayed that phone call with Margaret over and over. What if I had just let it go? What if I had taken Mia out for ice cream and pretended it didn't matter? Would she still be smiling now? Would she still be making strawberry scones on Sunday mornings? Guilt settles deep when you're a mother. Even when you know you did the right thing. Especially then. I stood in the hallway outside Mia's door. She was on her laptop, earbuds and a soft blue glow lighting her face. I knocked lightly. She looked up surprised. "Want to go for a walk?" I asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Just let me grab a hoodie." The air outside was crisp, pine-scented, the kind that made you feel like the sky could swallow your thoughts. We didn't talk at first. We passed the old coffee shop that used to host baking contests. She looked at it. Then away. Finally, I said, "You've been quiet lately." She kicked a pebble down the sidewalk. I don't know what to say. I waited. She added, "It's not you. It's not even them really. I just feel stupid." Her voice cracked on that last word. I stopped walking. So did she. "Why?" I asked. "You have nothing to feel stupid about." She shrugged. "I believed it was for me. That they loved me like you said they did." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. I thought, if I made everything perfect, they'd see me. And there it was. The weight I had carried for decades now echoed in my daughter's voice. I reached for her hand. She let me hold it. "Mia," I whispered, "they didn't reject you. They rejected the truth of who we are. And that truth is beautiful." She nodded once. But I could feel her pulling back into herself again. That night, I stood at the kitchen sink, hands deep in soapy water. The dishes weren't many. Just 2 mugs, a soup bowl, the pan from grilled cheese. Neither of us had really eaten. Outside, the wind picked up. Chimes danced on the porch. But inside it was still. Too still. I caught my reflection in the window. Tired eyes. Unwashed hair. A woman who looked like she was carrying generations of something heavy. I dried my hands and walked into Mia's room. She was reading. Well, pretending to. The book was upside down. I sat on the edge of her bed. "I've been thinking," I said. She didn't respond, but I felt her listening. All my life, I've tried to prove myself to people who decided who I was before I ever got the chance. She looked at me then. I thought if I just worked harder, smiled more, stayed quiet, I'd be invited back in. I thought love meant staying loyal to people who hurt you, as long as they were family. Her eyes glistened. But that's not love. That's performance. And I don't want that for you. She sat up slowly, pulling her blanket close. "What do we do then?" I exhaled. "We build something else. Our own table. Our own traditions. With people who make space for our joy, not just our usefulness." She was quiet. Then whispered. "Even if it's just us," I smiled. "Especially if it's just us." A tear slipped down her cheek. Not dramatic. Just real. I leaned forward and wrapped my arms around her. Held her tighter than I had in weeks. We didn't speak after that. Didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was healing. The next morning I woke up early. Set the kettle. Preheated the oven. And placed Mia's apron on the counter. Not as pressure, not as hope. Just a quiet reminder, she still gets to choose what she creates. And I'll be there whether she bakes or breaks or builds anew. The flyer was still open on my laptop the next morning. Tuesday community table, all welcome. I reread the line that had stopped me last week. We serve dinner with dignity. Everyone gets a seat. A seat. Not a reward, not a performance. Just a seat. I picked up the phone and dialed the number listed. A woman named Dana answered. Her voice was warm but efficient, like someone who'd seen both chaos and kindness in equal measure. I introduced myself, stumbled over my words. Then finally said I have cakes. Pies. Enough for 40 people. Maybe more. Can we help? She paused. Then asked, "Is it all homemade?" I smiled just barely. "Yes. Every crumb." "We'd love to have you," she said. Tuesday, 6 p.m. Come early if you'd like to help set up. I hung up. Looked at the kitchen. Flowers still dusted the edge of the counter. Mia's mixer sat silent, unplugged. But her blue linen napkins were neatly folded in the basket by the fridge. I texted Lisa, "It's happening." Tuesday night. And she replied with a photo of a trunk full of tea lights and paper lanterns. "You even have to ask." Mia came downstairs just as I was labeling boxes. She blinked at the containers. "Where's all that going?" I looked up. Community dinner. Tuesday night. A pause. She didn't ask permission. Didn't seek approval. Just stood there. Processing. Then quietly, "Do they know it was supposed to be for Grandma?" I shook my head. They just know someone made it with care." She sat down at the island. Traced her finger over the edge of a pie box. Then, without looking up, "Do you want me to come?" I swallowed. "You don't have to, but I'd love it if you did." Another pause. Then she nodded. "Okay. I'll bring the napkins." My heart clenched. Not from sadness, but from relief so tender it almost hurt. Tuesday came with spring rain. Not heavy, just enough to make the windows weep a little. We loaded the car in silence, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It was focused. Rooted. Whole. Mia wore her navy windbreaker and tied her hair into a low bun. I caught a glimpse of flower on her sleeve, small, but it made me smile. Lisa met us at the community center at 4:45. She was already inside, lighting candles and straightening folding chairs. The room was plain white walls, linoleum floors, but it held a certain peace, the kind that comes from intention. Mia unfolded her blue linen napkins. She smoothed each one with quiet precision, then placed them at every seat. I stood beside the dessert table, arranging pies and tarts. Lemon pecan blackberry crumble, each labeled with hand-drawn cards Mia had made the night before. Lisa played soft music from her phone. A little jazz. A little Nina Simone. It filled the space like something warm being poured. Then came the scent of garlic bread and soup warming in the kitchen. Volunteers trickled in, an older man with a limp carrying a box of forks, a young woman with a toddler strapped to her back offering juice boxes. No one asked where we came from. No one asked why we brought so much dessert. They just smiled, nodded, and kept preparing like we belonged. Mia glanced at me from across the room, her expression unreadable at first. Then soft. Proud. At 6:05 the doors opened. A woman in a raincoat entered first, pushing a stroller. Behind her, an elderly couple holding hands. Then a teenage boy with a shy nod. By 6:20 every chair was filled. We served slices of lemon tart onto paper plates. Mia placed a single mint leaf on each one. Like it mattered. Because it did. One man said, "I haven't had homemade anything in 2 years." Another asked if Mia had learned baking from a grandparent. She paused, then simply said, "I learned it from watching people I love." My throat tightened. I looked around that room, a room filled with strangers, candlelight, and laughter rising like steam. And for the first time in a long time it felt like family. At the end of the night Mia and I sat in the car with the windows fogged and the heater humming low. Her hands were still dusted with powdered sugar. She looked tired but not drained. She looked full. I turned to her. "That was beautiful." She nodded slowly. It felt like it mattered. Outside rain streaked the windshield like soft ink. The kind that doesn't blur, only deepens the page. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a copy of the community dinner flyer. On the back I'd scribbled some notes earlier that day. Mia peeked over. "What's that?" I hesitated, then handed it to her. At the top in pen, the second table project. Below it, ideas. Names, dates. Concepts for making this more than a one-time act of healing. A new tradition, not for recognition. Not even for redemption. Just to build something lasting. She read silently. Then smiled. "You want to do this again?" I looked at her. Not as a girl needing protection, but as a young woman standing at the start of something brave. "Yes," I said. And again after that. Every month. For anyone who's ever felt pushed to the side. She folded the paper, carefully slid it into her jacket pocket, then leaned her head back against the seat. "Okay," she whispered, "I'm in." At home, I placed the last of the dessert boxes into storage and turned off the kitchen lights. In the hallway, our old family photo still hung crooked, the frame chipped. I thought about taking it down. But instead I hung a second frame beside it. An empty one. I'd fill it later. With photos from tonight. Smiles that weren't forced. People who came not because of blood, but because they believed in showing up. The following week, we met Dana in a side room at the community center. The walls were beige, the windows fogged from the spring chill. A folding table stood at the center holding a box of grocery store donuts and 3 chipped mugs. There was nothing glamorous about the space, but somehow it felt like beginning. Mia walked in beside me, laptop hugged to her chest. Lisa followed, always a few steps ahead, emotionally already clutching a clipboard and 2 Sharpies. And me, I brought something I hadn't carried in years. Not shame, not apology, but a sense of direction. Dana greeted us with her usual calm. She gestured to the chairs. "I heard about last week's turnout," she said, settling in. "People are still talking about the pie girl." Mia smiled, her cheeks tinged pink. She didn't speak, just opened her laptop and clicked into a blank doc. Lisa nudged her playfully. "If this blows up, you're our brand," she whispered. We began planning. Tuesday again. Same time, bigger room. More tables, we wanted soft lights. Cloth napkins. Live music if we could find someone with a guitar and no fear of strangers. Dana said, "We don't have much budget." Lisa replied, "We've never had budget. We had people." And for the first time in years, I felt that truth settle in my bones. This wasn't about putting out fires anymore. It was about lighting new ones on purpose. We called it the Second Table Project, because if the first table doesn't welcome you, you build another. You don't shout to be seen, you create space. And let light do the talking. I wrote those words in my journal that night. Light does the talking. We made a list. Not just ingredients or flyers, but names. Groups. Women like me who were tired of asking for permission to matter. Mia suggested seniors from the nearby assisted living center. Lisa added teen mothers in transitional housing. I added one-word teachers. Burned out, forgotten. Still giving. We weren't just filling stomachs. We were writing invitations to dignity. That night at home, Mia sketched a logo at the kitchen table. 2 tables. One nearly full. One overflowing. No slogans. No explanations. Just connection. And as I watched her pencil move slowly across the page, I realized this wasn't just her healing. It was mine too, and maybe if we did it right, someone else's. The library's community room smelled like old paper and lemon-scented cleaner. Chairs were arranged in a lopsided circle. A corkboard held flyers about parenting classes, grief support, and budgeting on Snap. Lisa had signed us up for the Local Voices night without asking. She said it was time. At first I resisted. I didn't want to explain myself. Didn't want to rehash what Margaret did, what Harold didn't say, or how Mia's hands had trembled when she boxed up that cake. But then, I thought about all the women who might be sitting in that room. Quiet. Tense. Trying to shrink out of their own lives because someone else told them their pain was not personal. So I said yes. And now here we were. Mia sat in the front row. She wore her navy hoodie, arms crossed, not closed off, just bracing. Lisa introduced me with 5 words. "This is Karen." She rebuilt. That was it. No credentials, no praise. Just truth. I stepped up, held the microphone like it might break. Then breathed in slow and deep. I used to think being left out meant I had failed, I began. My family forgot me in small, quiet ways. Ways that were hard to name but easy to feel. I paused. Every woman in the room was watching me. Some with tilted heads, some with tears already brimming. I told them about the birthday, the text message, the untouched cake. I didn't name names, didn't point fingers, I just told it. Mia made lemon tarts and pecan pies for people who never showed up. And for a moment, I thought all that love had been wasted. A few heads nodded, a few lips pressed together hard. But love doesn't rot when it's not received, I continued. It waits. And sometimes it finds new mouths. New tables. I told them about the community dinner. The candlelight. The way Mia's eyes changed as strangers thanked her for something that had once been dismissed. And I told them we stopped waiting to be chosen. We started choosing ourselves. When I finished, the room was silent. Then applause. Not loud, but steady, like rain tapping on windows. Like recognition. That night Mia said, "You didn't even sound angry, just clear." And I realized that was more powerful than anger had ever been. 2 weeks later, I was back at the community center, same side room, same mismatched chairs. But something had changed. This time there were more people. 3 new volunteers. A local florist donating centerpieces. A woman named Carmen who offered to play acoustic guitar, no charge, just heart. Dana handed me a clipboard with a schedule. Lisa had drawn stars next to dessert reveal. And Mia had written in the margins. "Don't forget the gluten-free sign this time, Mom Tia." I smiled. The kind that rises slowly from the chest. Not performative, not polite, but real. This wasn't just a nice thing we were doing. It was a structure. A rhythm. A small, sturdy rebellion. We weren't demanding space in someone else's world. We were building our own with folding tables and warm bread and name cards in soft cursive. The week before, I'd found one of Margaret's old emails in a folder labeled Family Events. There were instructions, dress codes, what not to say, what not to bring. I stared at the screen, then closed the laptop, and wrote my own version. What's welcome at our table? Laughter, loud stories, second servings, moments of quiet grief. No one pretending, no one apologizing for taking up space. I printed it, pinned it to the community bulletin board. Let it live where it was needed most. That Friday, after Mia finished stacking pie boxes into the car, she turned to me. Do you think Grandma knows we're doing this? I paused. I think she'll hear about it eventually. Mia nodded. Then, will you tell her? I opened my mouth, then closed it. Would I call Margaret and say, look what you taught us, not through kindness, but through a mission? Would I ask her to witness this quiet justice, this new ritual rising from the ashes of her curated events, or would I let the work speak? Louder than anything she'd ever allowed me to say, I didn't answer right away. Because I wasn't sure if justice needed to be seen or simply lived. And maybe, just maybe, this was no longer about her at all. I didn't know the photo had been shared. Not until I opened my email and saw the subject line. Look who's making headlines, Boto. Forwarded from Aunt Gwen. My stomach dropped. Attached was a link to a small local blog. Just a feature. A feel-good piece. Title in bold: Mother-daughter duo hosts monthly dinners to uplift the overlooked. There we were. Me, arms around Mia, smiling in front of folding tables and string lights. The article mentioned Mia's desserts, our second table idea, and quoted Dana saying, "They don't talk much about why they started, but you can feel the meaning in everything they do." My phone vibrated before I even finished reading. Margaret, calling. I stared at the screen until it went dark. She didn't leave a voicemail. Not at first. The message came 2 hours later. Her voice was flat, rehearsed. Like she was trying to find the exact tone between "I'm proud" and "you embarrassed us." I saw the article. Glad to see you're doing something with your energy. I suppose some stories are better left private. Still, I hope it brings you whatever closure you've been needing. Closure. The word hit like ice. This wasn't closure. This was clarity. This was consequence. And she hated that it hadn't come through her. That evening, Mia was at the counter kneading dough for cinnamon rolls. The dough looked soft, pillowy. Her hands worked with ease I hadn't seen in weeks. I walked in. She looked up. "Grandma saw the article," I said. Mia didn't stop kneading. Just said, "She'll probably think it's about her." I almost laughed. But then Mia added, "And maybe it is. But not in the way she wants it to be." She brushed flour from her cheek. Calm, unbothered, strong. The kind of strong I had to earn in my 40s and she was already carrying at 18. I stood there watching her, and for the first time I wasn't afraid of Margaret's opinion. She could call, she could gossip. She could choose silence or scrutiny. None of it touched the truth anymore. Because the truth was already out there. In the light, in the photo. In Mia's hands dusted with flour and future. The invitation came through her English teacher. Mia had written an essay about the table that changed me. It wasn't meant for an audience, just an assignment, but Miss Travers read it 3 times, then sent us both an email. Would Mia consider speaking at the student leadership night? Just 5 minutes. No pressure. Just her voice. Mia hesitated. Her first instinct was, no. Of course it was. She didn't like being looked at. Didn't trust the room yet. Not after everything. But then she said, if I say no, the story stays theirs. So she said yes. The gym was warm, filled with folding chairs and a row of proud teachers in slacks and name tags. I sat in the second row, clutching the program like it might run away. Lisa was beside me. Dana came too. Mia wore a soft blue blouse. The one with the little stitched lemons near the collar. She had braided her hair just one side, a detail only I noticed. When her name was called, she walked slowly to the podium. No paper in hand. Just a breath. She looked up. Not rushed. Not shy. Just steady. I used to think baking was about precision, she began. Following the rules. Making sure nothing cracked or fell or came out wrong. Her voice was low, even. But one day I baked for people who never came. And I realized I wasn't trying to feed them. I was trying to earn something I never should have had to beg for. A silence fell over the room. You could hear pencils still. Fingers wrapped tighter around program booklets. She continued. My mom and I made something new. A table where people show up messy, tired, honest. And that's what I learned. Love doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be served. She stepped back. No dramatic bow, no performative tears. Just truth spoken and done. The applause didn't burst. It rose. Like light through stained glass. Steady. Warm. Real. She walked back to her seat, cheeks flushed, shoulders straight. And in that moment, I didn't see the girl who was left off the guest list. I saw the woman who built her own stage. The next day, Margaret called again. I let it ring. Once. Twice. 3 times. Then. I turned the phone face down on the kitchen table. Mia was in the living room pinning handwritten menus for our next dinner: cinnamon rolls, vegetable stew, brown butter shortbread cookies. She hummed quietly. Not for me, not for anyone, just for herself. My phone buzzed again. Voicemail received. I didn't listen. There was nothing she could say now that would rewrite what had already bloomed in the cracks. Nothing that could undo how Mia's voice had risen the night before, or how that room full of teenagers had leaned in as if learning something new about strength. I wasn't angry anymore. Not disappointed. Not even waiting. Just done. And full. That Friday we hosted our third second table dinner. This one was bigger. More hands, more faces. A local poet read verses about leaving things behind. A teenage girl stood in line twice just to say thank you again. Dana cried for the first time quietly behind the dessert table. Mia wore an apron that read, "This kitchen takes everyone." She handed out lemon tart slices like they were gold. And I stood back. Watched. People hugged, laughed, stayed longer than expected. Not a single person asked what we were trying to prove. Because we weren't proving. We were living. At the end of the night, Lisa handed me a mic. Just a quick thank you, she said. I paused. Felt the weight of all the years my voice had been swallowed in holiday toasts I never got to give. Then looked at Mia, who nodded once. And I stepped forward. I cleared my throat but didn't look at notes. Didn't need to. Sometimes the tables we're born into don't hold space for us. They ask for silence. For performance. For things that bend who we are until we forget the original shape. I looked out at the room. People held tea. Saturday on metal chairs softened with thrifted cushions. They were listening. So we build new tables. Not out of spite, but out of memory. And mercy. And the wild, stubborn belief that everyone deserves a seat that doesn't cost them their worth. Applause. Tears. Candlelight flickering against warm walls. And still no call from Margaret. No apology. No praise. Just silence. And for the first time, I didn't need anything else. 3 months passed. The air turned warmer. Peonies replaced tulips in the front garden, and the smell of dough returned to our kitchen like it had never left. Mia baked often again. But now it wasn't to impress anyone. There were no lists, no perfection, just flour on her cheeks and music humming from the living room speaker. I watched her from the doorway one Saturday morning. She moved slower now. Not cautious, just deliberate. There was no fear of being unseen anymore. The community dinners had become routine. Still full of grace, but no longer emotionally heavy. Just something we did, like brushing teeth or saying goodnight, necessary human sustaining. I no longer counted who didn't show up. Didn't scroll through group chats to see if anyone mentioned us. My mother had stopped calling. Harold never called at all. And for once their silence didn't sting. It felt appropriate. Like a door that had creaked for years and finally eased shut. One evening after a spring dinner where a boy had read a poem that made Mia cry and a widowed woman brought her husband's favorite biscuits, in his memory, I sat on our porch with a mug of chamomile and let the night air wrap around me. Mia joined me after putting away the last napkin. She leaned her head on my shoulder. We sat like that for a while. No conversation. Just the steady knowing between us. Finally, she said, "Did you ever think it would feel this light?" I smiled. Honestly, number. Then I looked at her, really looked. The same eyes that once searched a room for belonging now looked straight ahead. She didn't need to be chosen anymore. She had chosen. The next morning I received a letter. Not an email. Not a text. An envelope, handwritten. It was from Aunt Gwen. The one who always straddled the family line, always just passing along. Inside a simple note, "Saw your story again. Just wanted you to know I think you were right to walk away. Not everyone understands. But I do. No apology, no declaration. But somehow, it was enough. Because it wasn't about changing them anymore. It was about never betraying ourselves again." Mia didn't announce it. She just slid the envelope across the table one morning with her usual quiet resolve. I blinked. Culinary school. She nodded. Portland Culinary Institute, fall term. I tried to respond but couldn't at first. Not because I was surprised, but because I had waited years to see her choose herself with that much clarity. I didn't ask why she picked it. Didn't ask who else she told. I just reached across the table and held her hand. "I'm proud of you." She smiled, and for once I knew she already knew. That night I sat at my desk. The one where I used to write grocery lists, therapy notes, and forgotten passwords. Now I opened a blank page in my journal. The same one where I had once written, "This stops with me." This time I wrote something different. A letter to my younger self. You tried so hard to be acceptable. To be useful, small, unproblematic. You wore yourself thin making space for people who never made space for you. You thought love had to be earned in quiet compliance, not fierce presence. But one day you'll learn love doesn't arrive when you disappear. It comes when you stay standing. You'll raise a daughter. She'll mirror your deepest wound, being left out. But she'll also show you how to stay in. You will not fix your family. But you will break the pattern. And when you sit at the table you built from scratch, surrounded by people who came hungry for more than food, you'll realize you were never asking for too much, just asking the wrong people. I closed the journal slowly, then placed it on Mia's bookshelf for her to find someday. Not today, not tomorrow. But when she's ready. The doorbell rang. It was Lisa with leftover candles and a bottle of cider. "Let's toast," she said, to the fourth dinner and the first chapter of something bigger. I stepped out onto the porch with her. The sky was soft with evening. Birdsong in the distance. Dishes clinking faintly from someone else's home. And inside my chest, not a wound, but a rhythm. We had turned the fracture into a door. And walked through it. It began with a question at the end of our fifth dinner. A young woman, barely 20, nervous hands, blue scarf tied tight, approached Mia while holding a paper plate and something else in her other hand. A folded note. Soft creases. Like she'd carried it around all day before finding the courage. "I don't really have a group," she whispered. Her voice shook, but she didn't back down. "But I make challah every Friday. Would you maybe want bread at your table sometime?" Mia blinked. Then gave a quiet, unforced smile. "We'd love that." And just like that, I felt it. Something shift inside me. Not loudly, not like a door slamming, but like a window sliding open after years of being painted shut. Because in that moment, I knew. This didn't belong to just us anymore. What we'd built had grown legs, a rhythm, a heartbeat of its own. It had outlived the wound that birthed it. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. Thick envelope. Handwritten. Not from my mother, not from Margaret. but from the local neighborhood council. They'd heard about our second table dinners, read about them, watched quietly, and now they wanted to honor us at the summer gathering. Just a few words, they said. Optional remarks. No pressure. But if we wanted to speak, the microphone would be there. At first, I laughed. Me 10 years ago, I couldn't even speak up when a waiter brought the wrong dish. Now, they wanted me to stand in front of people and talk about healing, about legacy. But then again, maybe that was the point. Maybe the fact that I never saw this moment coming meant it needed to happen. I didn't prepare a speech. I wrote something the night before, folded it twice, and tucked it in the side pocket of my purse just in case. The day of the event, the park smelled like watermelon, sunscreen, and possibility. Children screamed joyfully barefoot in the grass. Potluck tables wobbled under the weight of Tupperware and paper plates. Mia wore a soft cotton dress and her "This Kitchen Takes Everyone" apron. Lisa arrived with a bundle of fresh peonies from her garden, still damp from rinsing. When our names were called, we stood up together. No heels, no fanfare. Just us. I unfolded the paper slowly, and read. "This isn't about food," I said. It never was. It's about what happens when people finally realize they don't have to keep waiting to be invited. There was a pause, a collective exhale, and then applause. Steady, unforced, warm. Applause that didn't say "well done." It said "we see you." And finally, so did I. That night, I couldn't sleep. The applause had faded hours ago. The dishes were done. The flowers Lisa brought stood quietly on the windowsill in an old pickle jar. But something still stirred inside me. So I got out of bed, pulled out my journal, and wrote a letter I never planned to send. Not to Margaret. Not even to Mia. But to someone I didn't know yet, the version of myself who might be sitting in a quiet kitchen somewhere, still waiting to be invited. To the woman still sitting at the old table, I see you. I know how hard it is to stay quiet just to be kept. How deeply it hurts to pour yourself into meals, moments, memories only to be overlooked. I know how many times you've replayed that one gathering, that one omission, that one moment when the chair wasn't pulled out for you. And I know what it costs to pretend it didn't matter. But here's what no one told us. The table isn't sacred. You are. And if the table asks you to shrink, to earn, to disappear, it's not a table. It's a stage. And stages were made for performances, not for nourishment. You don't have to prove your worth to people who decided long ago not to see you. You don't have to keep cooking for those who never learned to taste. You are allowed to stand up. To walk out. To build a second table. It won't be glamorous. It may be shaky at first, wood, borrowed napkins mismatched, but it will be yours. And the people who gather around it. They'll come not because they expect something from you, but because they want to bring something with them. Stories, bread, presence, truth. And that kind of table. It doesn't collapse, it grows. You don't need permission to begin. You just need one deep breath. And the belief that your story still belongs somewhere. Maybe even here. With love, someone who finally stood up. I folded the page, not to send but to keep. A kind of emotional will. Not made of assets or instructions, but made of permission. Permission to leave behind the hunger for validation. And carry forward only what feeds us. The morning Mia left for culinary school, the kitchen smelled like cinnamon and nerves. She made breakfast for both of us: eggs, toast, and a half batch of blueberry muffins she didn't even eat. We sat at the table, steam rising between us, neither of us quite knowing what to say. Her suitcase waited by the door. The same door I'd once watched her walk away from, heartbroken, icing still on her fingers. Now she left by choice. Not because someone closed a door, but because she had opened her own. She hugged me tightly, her voice pressed into my shoulder. "You made me strong enough to go." I held her there for a moment longer, then pulled back just enough to whisper, "No, sweetheart, you made me strong enough to let go." And we both smiled through the tears neither of us had tried to stop. After she left, the house settled, not in grief, in grace. The blue napkins were folded in their basket. The mixer sat quiet but ready. A loaf of bread still warm rested on the counter with a note beside it. For you. Just because. The silence wasn't sharp anymore. It was soft. Like the hush of a room that had served its purpose and was still full. I cleaned the counters slowly, as if each motion was a memory. Flour dust from past weeks. Faint lemon scent on the cutting board. The ghost of music still lingering in the corners. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I sat down with a cup of tea. No task, no noise. Just me. I looked at the second table. The one we built not with wood but with wounds and willpower. I traced a small scratch on its surface. The kind that comes from being used, not neglected. From being real. And in that moment I felt it, not pride exactly. Something deeper. Softer, a knowing. That what we'd started wasn't over. It would move forward in Mia's hands. In someone else's hala. In the shared silence of strangers finally being seen. That night I lit a single candle. Placed it in the center of the table. The flicker danced on the rim of my tea mug and stretched a golden ribbon across the wood. I whispered into the warm quiet, I'm not waiting anymore. And with that I exhaled the final need to be chosen. And chose myself again. Not because of who left, but because of who stayed me. And from now on, wherever the table is, I'll know. It isn't the setting that matters, it's the seat I give myself. Subscribe to EN Reddit Story for more true stories of quiet justice, healing, and closure for women after 40. You are not alone. Share your story below.